time and welcome everybody. As Anna said, this is our first in our series of eShip Extras webinars, and we've got a fantastic event to kick things off with. Today's event is about human-centered design remotely, maximizing individual and team performance while attempting to do so anyway. Our fabulous guests with us today are Alastair Simpson, who is the Vice President of Design at Dropbox. Welcome, Alastair.
Thanks, great to be here.
And Monal Chokshi, who is the Head of Senior Director and Head of Research and Insights at Dropbox. Welcome, Monal.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Just before we do start, in the spirit of reconciliation, the Monash Entrepreneurship Portfolio acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We do pay our respects to their elders past and present and emerging, and we also wish to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations on whose land Monash University operates, and pay our respects to traditional owners of the land from which our attendees join us today. A little bit of housekeeping, Anna.
Alrighty, so as you can see, we are recording here today. Surprise, none of you are on camera. It's just our fabulous panelists today because we're in a webinar format. But if for some reason you're not comfortable with your name or anything being shown in this recording, which we will share with our community afterwards, please just send me a DM in the chat and I'll be happy to make that happen for you. As Dave, Monal and Alastair are chatting away today, feel free to pop your questions in the Q&A function, which is in the, well, I think we all know where that is after a year on Zoom, but it's just down the bottom in that toolbar panel, and we'll get to them later. And then also use the chat function exactly as you are, just chatting away about anything that you're interested in, and to connect with each other. And the last thing I'll note is at the end of this session, there will be a really quick couple of questions that takes you to a Typeform link. We'd love to get your feedback on the event. We're always trying to make these more engaging and exciting to be a part of. So we'd love to have your feedback and ideas about how we can continue to make that happen and make it better.
Thank you, Anna. It looks like my team has done a bit of mashing here. From LinkedIn profiles and professional profiles. I'm David, and I have the enormous pleasure and privilege of leading the portfolio here in entrepreneurship at Monash Business School. Just for everybody's reference, the audience is combined of students, we have industry folk, and we also have our teaching staff on. So welcome everybody. And yes, as it says, I am a very, very keen surfer, having started when I was 4 years of age. So I've been going about 95 years and going pretty strong. So it's a very, very important part of me, but on to some more important people, please, Anna. Our two guests today are at the top of their game in their field, and we're very, very privileged and honoured to have both Alastair and Monal join us today. I'd like to just kick off with a very, very broad question to each panelist, just to set the scene. Alastair, can you tell us why you think human-centered design is important?
Yeah, of course. I mean, and I'm loving the chat. It's great to see people from Jakarta, Beijing, Melbourne, wherever you are in the world, though. I hope you're safe and well with the ongoing pandemic. And then anyone in Australia, like I'm originally from England, 12 years in Australia. So anyone in Australia who's been affected by the floods, I hope you're, again, doing safe and well. But the broad question, why is human-centered design important? I think, I like that you use human-centered design and not one of the new terms, lean user experience or user-centric design even, because I think going back to our roots of human-computer interaction or human-computer design is always incredibly important, because those foundations and those principles about focusing on the humans that are at the end of the things that you're making is just incredibly important in terms of building things that matter and that last and that actually solve a real problem in the world, which I think is often what can be missing in today's world as we try to go too fast, really, sometimes, right? And not focus on the core problem and the core human that's the end of the thing that we're making. And And I think that is really the answer of why it's still important today, and just as important as it was decades ago. And I think just lastly on it, you can, because I'm sure we'll touch on this, you can apply it to anything, not just making products. Like we've just shifted to a different way of working at Dropbox permanently. Even through the pandemic, we've shifted to what we're calling virtual first. So we'll be remote as our primary mode of interaction with one another as employees. But as part of that, we're not building a product, we're actually changing our ways of working. We've modeled human-centered design, we've turned it inward, and we've been following employees. Researchers from Monal's team have been following pilot groups to see how they're adapting to these changes. And so it's not just building products, it's actually anything that you do and you make and how you interact with one another, that you can apply those principles of human-centric design to what you're doing and to what you're making.
Fantastic answer. And I'll come back to that virtual first in the discussion, because that sounds very, very interesting. And I really like the point about it's not just about product and service. And for our students who are listening, this is really a core philosophy that we use in our teaching. So hopefully you've taken note of that. Very, very important. Monal, being head of research, I'd like, if you wouldn't mind, just to spend a quick couple of minutes on articulating the difference between design research and, for want of a better word, pure academic research.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a shift, I think, for a lot of academics to start doing research in the business or corporate environment, because there is, there are quite a few differences. And so I'll highlight three things that I see that are key differences. One I'd say that comes to mind right away is time. So an academic researcher may spend years, months or years working on a research project. And, first thing that comes to mind is like a dissertation or something like this, right? It could take 2 years, it could take 10 years, in business, time is money. Oftentimes we don't have the luxury of really looking at a question for that long. And we need to turn things around a bit faster to keep moving. So I'd say that's one of the big differences, that we have quicker turnarounds in terms of answering questions. And we might not go as in depth as an academic research or a researcher in academia. The second thing is centered around impact. Now, a lot of academic research, has great impact in the world, but it's often very narrow, and the impact might not be seen for years. It's like oftentimes long reaching. And this is part of how the academic system is set up, where you publish a paper, it's reviewed, it takes several years, and then, you don't see it for a couple of years. In business, again, going with that time aspect, it's we really need to be focused on questions that are going to impact the business and answering those questions so we can drive decisions and drive strategy around those decisions. So that kind of business impact for moving the business forward is really important, which we might not get from academic research. And finally, I'll say, and this is my favorite one, is that in business, I think there's a lot more opportunities to collaborate, and which might be counterintuitive, because, before I went into grad school, I saw, oh, there's like 10 people on this paper, like an academic paper. And I thought, oh, they're so collaborative. And then when I got to academia, I realized in grad school that actually it's really one person, and then there are advisors on there, maybe a few other contributors or people who have read the paper. I see you laughing, David. But I think the nice thing about being in business, doing research in a business environment, is that you can really work with your cross-functional collaborators, learn from one another, and they can be part of the research that you do as well. And work on empathizing with our users, analyzing the results, and making decisions collaboratively. So those are the three.
Great answer. And yes, I was smiling, shall we say. Coming from industry into academia, I can commiserate with all of those issues, and I'm sure my colleagues out there that are sitting there going, yes, I've submitted that journal article and still haven't heard about it. And it's 2 years, what's going on? So, yep, understand that totally. Coming back to virtual first, there was a really great question from one of our lecturers around what were some of the assumptions that you had when COVID hit around working virtually and managing teams in that mode. So if I could ask, has anything bubbled to the surface in terms of those assumptions? Were they validated? Were they not true? And what were some of the things that you found from the research team following this new initiative?
Yeah, I think everybody, well, not everybody actually. I think we've seen 10 years of development in working remotely in the last 10 months, I think is the kind of nutshell. And I think there are companies, 200-year-old companies like the New York Stock Exchange, who previously said we could never work remotely and are now completely rethinking that, because after a year of data, people are realizing that it can be done, and it can be done effectively. You don't just get by, you can actually be more effective, and not in every case, and you have to be very intentional. And I think intentionality is really important, but in many cases, employees are happier because they don't have to commute anymore, and they don't have to spend 2 hours each way on a commute, and they can spend that time with their family, or they can spend that time doing something else that they would rather do. And so I think one of the biggest assumptions was that just this can't be done, whereas actually it can be done. And, you know, to make it, you know, to ground us all, Dropbox has always had offices located across the world, predominantly San Francisco, Seattle, Austin, New York. We do have an office in Sydney, in Singapore and Dublin. But we announced a shift in October to move virtual first. We're calling it virtual first for deliberate reasons, but we will not go back to the office as a normal co-located office setup where employees go to an office to do their work. We will also not be remote only. So there are companies like GitLab who are very successful in remote only. They do not have an office and everybody works from home wherever they are around the world. We also will not have a hybrid setup. Google is a good example of announced a hybrid setup. Employees can choose to work from an office or from home. We've announced virtual first, where our primary mode of interaction will be remote. Everybody will work from home. We're retaining a lot of our offices, but we are making them for meaningful moments of collaboration and culture building. So we have deliberate activities that we expect to happen in those offices, not one-on-one meetings, not going to sit at an office to work, but moments to come together to collaborate through a problem or to build culture by doing team building activities or learning and development. And so it's a very deliberate and intentional strategy, because we recognize that it's important for teams to come together face to face to build that connection. But we also want to give employees flexibility to live where they want to live and not commute day in, day out. And we want to create a level playing field for all employees, which sometimes hybrid doesn't give you that, because if somebody's in the office and somebody's remote, that can be quite difficult. It's not a level playing field. And so as we made this shift, you asked about assumptions. Some of the assumption was, well, you know, can this be done? Will teams want to do this? And so we surveyed employees, we listened, we looked at what was going on in the market, we looked at trends in the future of work and how work was becoming more distributed, like people were expecting that. And then we looked at how we, as I said, created a level playing field, an equitable playing field for all employees. And that's how we landed on virtual first. As we shifted to that model, we ran pilot studies. You referenced, and I've referenced, like the research group. We ran pilot studies with about 70 employees where we had a qualitative researcher following those employees to see, well, how are you making the shift? How are you adapting virtual first practices? And something that we did, which I think is not completely novel, but somewhat different, is we shared, and you can go and find this, the Virtual First Toolkit. If you search for Virtual First Toolkit Dropbox, you can find that publicly available. But it's a set of practices for employees so that they can work more effectively together as teams in a virtual environment, but also so they can look after themselves in a virtual environment, because it's very different just being in your home office all day, every day, right? And so we want to make sure that we're looking after employees' well-being. But we followed about 70 employees as they made this change. And we had a qualitative researcher. They were doing a diary study. So we received feedback every couple of days on how things were going, how the materials we were providing were helpful or not helpful. And I don't think anything was blown out of the water that we were miles off. There was no like big aha that this was totally wrong, but we got lots of really great small pieces of feedback to make our training materials and the toolkit just slightly more effective and slightly more impactful for all of our employee base, that we've iterated on and we've updated and then shared back with our employees, and we're continuing to listen. And so just having that mindset of, it's not set and forget, it's classic product development really, but build, measure, learn, and then iterate, and then listen to the employees of what they're saying about what's working and what's not, has been really impactful for us as a company as we make this transition, and try and be as thoughtful as possible as we do that.
Fantastic. Monal, anything to add there?
Well, I think it's super exciting because, as Alastair had mentioned, and some folks in the chat also mentioned, going from, working from home, going back to the office, and then now we're working from home and maybe forever for some folks, and it's really a shift overall. And so I think everyone's sort of figuring out how to do this and how to do this well. So we're really breaking new ground, and I think Dropbox is one of the few companies that are really focused on ensuring success in a virtual first, or this kind of distributed work environment. And so I think it's a really exciting experiment that Dropbox is moving forward with, but also the research that we will be doing, we're hoping will be really leading the industry and helping folks understand how to do it better for themselves too. So I know it's been a challenge for a lot of folks, and us included, and we're figuring it out as we go, but we're also like leaning into really understanding it.
Thank you. There was some very, very interesting things there. Firstly, for the students, you don't have to survey to get good data points. And if you listen to what Alastair said, he was talking about observations, he was talking about diary studies, and surveys as a combined mixed methods approach, which gives you far richer insights than just sending out a survey for somebody to answer, and potential biases that occur with that. So good thing to note there. The toolbox sounds fascinating. I'm very interested at a tactical, obviously at that strategic level, you've made that shift towards virtual first. At a tactical level, how do you change that mindset and practice around people being more purposeful with their time?
You use the term that we're using internally, mindset. I think it's incredibly hard, is the honest answer. Because if you think about what we're doing, like I mentioned that we've probably seen 10 years of development in the last 10 months. If you actually think about what the world is trying to do, for over 100 years, we've been ingrained that office work happens between 9 to 5, and you go to a place of work, and that's just how work gets done, right? And then once we got new tools, products like email and chat apps, then it was like, oh well, the working day kind of just extended. It was supposed to help shorten it, but it actually just extended because it just bled into your personal time. And so with remote work and with virtual first, we're trying to not just behavior change to 2,500 employees at Dropbox, which we are, but we're also trying to undo 100+ years of ingrained behaviors that we've built up and have just been accepted as norms. And so that's a very difficult task to shift all of our mindsets, not because anybody is deliberately trying to not shift their mindset, but that's just a lot to unpick. And trying to do that behavior change at scale is hard. Like, it is hard. But I think some of the things that we're trying to do are unlearn habits that no longer serve us. And so things like reflexively just creating a meeting, right? I'll just put a quick sync in with David. Okay. But that takes away David's time. It could be at a time where he's, looking after a family member. It could be a time that he has a doctor's appointment. It could be, you don't need to actually, and so but that's our reflex, right? That's our default. So trying to change that mindset from going from what we're calling all day syncs to async by default. And I think you'll hear this is somewhat the word of 2021, I think, is like asynchronous work. But trying to change your mindset from that all day syncs to asynchronous by default is something that we're trying to do internally. And we've just created kind of 5 high-level behavior changes that we're trying to model, and we're trying to ladder all of our practices and tools up to these 5 kind of high-level behavior change models, with things like from all-day syncs to async by default, from busyness to impact. And again, in that one, we're trying to focus on, well, not being busy, but what is the customer problem that we're trying to solve? And how do we most positively impact that? And things like from disconnection to belonging, because again, remote work can lead to more disconnection, but we want to create belonging and inclusivity in how we're shifting. And so how you change that mindset, like I've spoken about a little bit at a high level, tactically, modeling the change from top down. So I shared an internal blog post of how I've changed my calendar so that I can pick up my kids at 3 o'clock on a Friday, so that I can follow our core collaboration hours. So something that we're doing is we're asking employees to have a 4-hour block where they're online for synchronous collaboration. And the rest of the day, you can design your own nonlinear workday that suits your own setup, right? So if you need to, like me, go and pick my kids up at 3, I can go do that. I just have to create that kind of nonlinear workday around it, because the 9 to 5 no longer really, works. Okay. And so modeling the change from people like myself, like saying, this is my calendar, this is how I've changed it, these are the practices that I'm adopting, giving tools like the toolkit that encourage people and give people permission once they see the behavior modeled from the top to actually make those changes. Because in the toolkit, there's something that encourages people to say no to a meeting. It's like, ask if this can be accomplished asynchronously. Using social proof, really, it's a psychology term, but using social proof of, hey, read about how Sandra, one of our managers, is adopting virtual first practices to give people permission. We've created training materials that support the toolkit, and we've actually trained over 1,000 employees on how to adopt an asynchronous by default mindset. And so there's lots and lots of things that we're doing tactically to try and model that change and to try and support all of our employees through the shift to kind of this virtual first work.
Yeah, geez, there's a lot of stuff there to discuss. Those core collaboration hours sound very, very interesting. Monal, what insights have emerged from the research with following all of these people? I'm particularly interested in their well-being.
Yeah, I think some of it's compounded by the fact that, given the larger environment, of course, that's kind of put a damper on some of the opportunities that are being seen for this flexible work style. But overall, I think there's a lot of opportunity here, and some of the insights I think have really revolved around, how do we work best together, and given the challenges of different time zones and async, these collaborative hours, how can we come together culturally? And the great thing about virtual first is that, as Alastair mentioned, we still do have these offices where we will meet with folks. So I feel like it's really getting the best of both worlds. I don't know, Alastair, do you have any other specifics in terms of the insights?
Some of the insights just from following employees have been that they, the need to create kind of social contracts as a team, right? Because you don't know, right? You don't know when Alastair needs to go pick up his kids, right? But if you can give thoughtful indicators, like small things like your Slack status, right? So that it indicates that, hey, I'm in heads down deep focus mode. Please don't disturb me, right? Like, so just those small indicators, because we have a number of tactics in the toolkit to create those social contracts within a small team of say 10 people that you work with regularly, so that you can share that. Like, what is your best working time? When will you be offline? When can you expect communication back? Because you just don't know, right? Like, when you're in the office, you can see everyone, but when you're remote, and especially if we have backgrounds like many of us do right now, it's like, what is on? Like, where is this person, right? And certainly we do not want to be, tracking time and doing those kind of things, but you might need small social cues like your Slack status, or you're making your calendar public. Again, that's something that some people do, is they try to make their calendar private, but making your calendar public so people can see. Some other small things, color coding your calendar, right? And so for you as an individual, when your free time is, when you look at that. And that's something that came out of the research, where people really liked the color coding their own calendar. And it's actually something I've done for a number of years. But those are, some of the insights that we've gleaned initially. But as I said, it's more, and I think this again is going to be more and more important in the future of work. It's leading with empathy as a leader, but also as an employee, and having empathy for everyone else's personal situation, and being able to create a trusting environment so that you can share that with your team, I think is really, really more important as we move to this kind of remote and virtual world. Because as I said, you can't see everybody, right? You don't see them in the office.
Thanks for that, Alastair. Sorry, Monal?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to add to that as well. I think one of the things that we've probably all felt from working from home is sometimes that boundary, that separation of like work and home life. And so I think one of the learnings that we have as well is just being empathetic with other people, but also with yourself, because you want to be able to set those boundaries and make that what somewhat can feel artificial separation between, when you have your laptop open and when you have it closed, when you can actually feel like you're done with work and move on to your life. So many of our employees live in cities with small, places to live. So they don't necessarily have all the extra space for a home office, but like really dedicating a space of your home to that, and then leaving that as like, this is where I go for work, this corner of the room, and then this is where I go to relax, the other side of the room, something like this. But really ensuring those boundaries, and then I think some good routines are really key.
That's important. We've seen, again, that's just sparked something. We've seen from research that people fake their commute, but it's really important, right? Going for a walk before at 8:30, getting a coffee, and then coming home to your office is actually quite important, because you get 20 minutes out of the house. Of course, you can make your coffee at home or your tea at home, but actually just giving yourself that separation and just building on what Monal said, that boundary, that like, right, I'm going out for my commute, even though you come back to the same place. It's like, it's important for people, right? It's important for people to have that separation. Otherwise you can feel like you're always on.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And I found that a little bit overwhelming in the last year, particularly during lockdowns, where you're actually in your house, can't go outside of it. And it's like, wow, I'm on all the time. And it burns you out. It's not too good. The other thing that really sort of resonated with me is about making assumptions. You talked about undoing habits that we've had for hundreds of years, and now in this remote environment, we jump to some assumptions that are not necessarily accurate or true. And so I've had to really be quite purposeful in stepping back from making any assumptions about what people are doing and when they're doing it. It's really about the output and the performance from people and what they produce. And, you know, I'm going to give a shout out to my team here. The beauty of having a great team is you don't have to ask for things. They're actually delivered without asking. And when you're at that point, you know your team's functioning at a very, very high level, which is extremely pleasing. So well done, Nikki and Anna. I'm going to bring that into your discussion into an academic, I guess, setting. Many of the things you spoke about social contracts, about we've actually adopted your Working With Me document from last year, Alastair, which has been very, very useful. And it is about that communication and letting people know what are the boundaries and, you know, how you communicate and what your style of work is, and therefore how to mash that together into something that's cohesive and you know, pointed in the same direction. We have to deliver hybrid, and it's an enormous challenge to have students in the classroom, but also students in Indonesia and China, everywhere around the world. You know, students in the US and Canada getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning and not being too happy about that. Any tips or tricks in terms of how to effectively get people communicating, because you can't read body language from a digital screen? It's very, very difficult. In fact, looking at a couple of classes this week, I've noticed that students are actually switching their videos off. And so that level of engagement is a really difficult one. Any tips or ideas that might, I guess, drive a little more collaboration and engagement?
It's I don't have the link, but there's a wonderful Twitter thread from I think a high school teacher in the US, where she talks about this topic, and she had some, I haven't got the tips, but there's a great Twitter thread if we can find it. And she has some really great data on levels of engagement with her classmates on, of her students when she requested that videos were kept on versus when they kept them off. And so I don't have the insights from it, but it was this wonderful thread that I saw. But my first thing would be, does it have to be synchronous? Do you have to be on video? Like, one of the things I've learned, certainly as we shift to virtual first and in prior jobs, is when I've had distributed teams, is question everything, right? Does this have to be synchronous? Like, what is the purpose of this? And we talk about this at Dropbox now, where a synchronous meeting needs to be for the 3 Ds: to discuss, debate, or decide. If you're doing anything else, it's not a synchronous meeting. There's no point, right? Like and so the first thing would be to question it. The second thing would be, if you want to look for moments of collaboration, again, if you doesn't need to be synchronous, allowing people to collaborate in their own time zone asynchronously at a time that is convenient for them is often much more equitable and inclusive a practice versus, as you mentioned, somebody at 3 a.m. in the morning. I probably want my video off at 3 a.m. in the morning because I'm really tired and it's super dark. And so if you question it and it doesn't need to be synchronous, but then you can actually shift it to asynchronous, you may find that you create more moments of collaboration if you're using the right tool that will allow asynchronous commenting and threading on the topic. The other thing that can happen asynchronously using screen capture tools is, like, you can create short videos of yourself, which has become much more popular in the last year, to explain a concept in 2 minutes that previously would have taken 1,000 words, right? So those would be, well, they're the top two, but then really underlying that is, you really need to create the environment of psychological safety and trust to enable collaboration and communication amongst teams. Because quite often, you know, we see this at companies that are like, well, we've got the tool to collaborate, and or we're in a meeting and people not speaking up. And it's like, well, have you created the space and the right environment to allow people to feel comfortable and safe to speak up. And again, sorry for referencing the toolkit again, but we talk about how to run inclusive meetings, right? And how to set the stage so that people do feel comfortable, so that there is an agenda sent out beforehand, so they know what the topic is, so people can come prepared and ready to debate. And lastly, it's also modeling that behavior as a leader of that class or group to encourage the debate and encourage the space to kind of do that. And so that would be my things. But I don't think I answered your question directly, David, because I questioned whether it should even be synchronous to start with.
Look, it's a very difficult question to answer, and I think a lot of people are grappling with this. But I'm very, very pleased, and I'm sure all the students that are in our fast track program will be ticking off the things that you've talked about in terms of how we deliver the program. For example, psychological safety. So we don't use but, we use and things, just little techniques like that. So you're not shooting people down all the time. It's more around, well, how can we extend what they're talking about or go in a different direction that may take us to some new revelation that we never thought about. So it's really pleasing to hear that, you know, what we're doing aligns with what you're doing as well. Some great questions. I'm going to move down to product service development now, because we've got some aspiring young entrepreneurs in the audience. And one question we've got from Abhishek is around how to really keep the focus of HCD in product service design, because we're so hardwired to jump to solutions. Monal, would you like to lead off on that one?
Yeah, I mean, what is the saying? Maybe Alastair, you remember exactly, but it's, you know, we don't want people to fall in love with the solution. We want them to fall in love with the problem. And so really focusing on who your customers or users or audience is, understanding them and their needs, empathizing with them, and really feeling the issues that they are facing. Having that inspire and your team feel inspired by looking at that problem, picking it apart, really understanding the motivations that the user has. There's a design thinking exercise that I often have done in the past called an empathy map, where you look at what people, like who your users or customers or humans, will say in this case, are saying, and what they are and doing, and extrapolating that what they're thinking and feeling. And from that, you really start to get deeper into understanding what are their motivations for whatever it is they're trying to do, really empathizing with the user, and then putting that into the context they're in to help us then start to brainstorm the solutions. But, you know, I think in order to get to a viable solution, and it's really important to really understand the problem we're trying to solve.
Thanks, Monal. And again, that just reiterates what we present in class constantly. Don't fall in love with the solution. It's the problem that's really, really important. Alastair, anything to add there?
I mean, yes, totally what Monal said, but there's a bunch of tactics, right? It's like focusing, well, constraints can often drive divergent thinking. So what constraints can you put on to actually generate more ideas? There's, I don't think they're in production anymore, but there's a wonderful set of cards called mental notes cards, which give you different trigger words, and then you have to go and ideate solutions based on those trigger words, right? And so that's another kind of disruptive thinking kind of practice. There's another one called New Rivers, which a former colleague at Atlassian, Ben Crothers, used to run really, really well, but it's basically taking a different industry and using that as a river to explore ideas on, right? Like using that as a way, like how did mining solve this, right? Like how would they solve it, right? And so there's lots of different tactics to force yourself. The other biggest one that I think that I often try to push is just stay low fidelity. Too often people jump to high fidelity and just even though with modern design systems, it's very easy to create something high fidelity, but that's not the point. As soon as you put it into a high fidelity, it looks done, right? It looks finished. Whereas the lower fidelity that you can do it, you can create your artifact in, the better, because it encourages debate and discussion versus something that looks finished, which just narrows and closes the conversation quite often. And so just doing that, and then as a leader, just forcing that, making sure that people know you're in a divergent phase, right? Because the double diamond, you're diverging, you're converging. Hey team, we're actually trying to get more ideas. Like that's the point, right? Like let's keep going. But yeah, Monal's first quote is the best one. Like you have to stay focused on the problem.
Yeah, look, great stuff. As you know, we're recording this, and I think our teaching team who are out there are just sitting there smiling and clapping hands because they're actually doing what you're talking about. And I think we might have to play this video before next class across the portfolio next week, just to say, hey, this is what Dropbox is doing, and this is what you're learning, and they're actually a good fit. So thank you very much for that. We're going to fly into Q&A time now. Anna, do we have any questions for our illustrious panel?
We absolutely do. I can read them out for you if you would.
If you wouldn't mind, that'd be great, given my poor eyesight.
That's all right. So we've actually got our first question is from Imran, who's one of our fast track students completing full specialization. Hello, Imran. He's said, how would you tackle new joinees in a virtual first environment? I started a remote job earlier this year, found it very challenging to build a bond over Zoom or make myself feel relevant and inclusive in the team. Great question.
I started remotely too at Dropbox. I started on March 24th, tomorrow. And so we were in the middle of lockdown. And so I empathize. It's definitely difficult. Like it is definitely difficult. And the thing that, I think there's a few, I guess, high level, like being intentional with your actions, right? If I think about trust, right? It's the trust equation is being credible. So what you say is backed by some form of data or good, solid opinion, being reliable, doing what you said you were going to do by the time you said you were going to do it. And then underscored by empathy, showing that you care and just being a human, really. And so I think all of those things are, if you're very intentional, eminently possible via Zoom, via remote. And then that's what you can do as an individual. I don't doubt, though, that the ability to break bread or grab coffee with someone definitely helps in building those relationships early on. If you look at many of the successful remote companies, even in your first week, even though you're fully remote, they will come together with your manager and the employee to actually onboard you for a week. So I don't doubt that. The other side, on the company side, though, is again being really intentional with how you onboard and integrate new employees. I know that at Dropbox, we're really working hard on that, around how do you get people set up and made to feel welcome as quickly as possible, getting people into the right channels, making sure that's not a mystery, making sure that their laptop just works and that they have the right equipment. We have wonderful at-home kits now that you can order through our portal, which give you things like a microphone that I have underneath me and give you things like a better camera, just so that you get set up quickly so that you don't need to worry about those things and you can focus on building trust and connecting with employees. And so having your employer be very intentional about how you onboard, I think is incredibly important, as well as what you do as an individual to earn trust and be credible, be reliable, be human, because ultimately that's what we all are, really.
Monal, anything?
Yeah, I was just going to add a couple of quick things. First, I'll plus one to everything Alastair said, but also I think one of the things when I also started in the middle of COVID, so I actually have not met Alastair or anyone else I work with in person. So I know Alastair and I are in the same boat in that sense. And one of the things that I was it's easy to fall into when all your face-to-face meetings are through Zoom, is to disregard some of the small talk that you might normally have when you meet up with people in person. And you know, I really appreciated the culture at Dropbox, because when I did start, people were like, hey, let's just take the first meeting just to get to know each other and we can talk about whatever. And it wasn't just diving right into like, you know, okay, these are our goals. This is what we have to accomplish like this quarter, and things like that. So I really appreciated the ability to try and get to know folks a little bit better before we start working together. I think that's really important in terms of building relationships and collaboration. And it's something that you often get for free in person, because there's, you know, there you have the physical presence, you walk together, you know, maybe walking to get some tea, have that small talk. You don't have that on Zoom. So I think, like Alastair said, being really intentional about those things is important.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Anna, next question.
I'm going to throw over to my colleague sitting right next to me, Nikki, for the next question.
Oh, Dave, she's making me work. So next up, we've got Paul Collier. He's actually our director of our MBA here at Monash, and he's touching on, Dave, what you were asking about before, that whole, you know, hybrid delivery mode that we're all having to sort of navigate at the moment. His question is, face-to-face work, or work where everyone is zooming in, seems to work fine, but what is the solution where some people are working, studying / teaching face-to-face together whilst others are remote? The experience is quite different for each group, and there is a lot of pressure on the facilitator or teacher to manage those dual mode teams.
It's hard. That's why hybrid setups are difficult. Something though, a short anecdote, like when I was at Atlassian, I was in Sydney and I moved to America. I was part of a leadership team that was predominantly in Sydney. It was a very effective leadership team, a great meeting that I had every week, like 90-minute meeting I had every week when I was in Sydney. When I moved to America, it became one of the worst meetings ever for me, because I was one of only 2 people remote. Everyone else is in Sydney sitting around a conference room, and I was the bobblehead at the top, right? Like dialing in from the US, often late at night. And, you know, cross conversations were happening in that meeting room in Sydney. And it became one of the worst meetings, to be honest, for me. Something that I then did, which I took from the Trello team at Atlassian, who are fully remote, is even if Trello actually, even though they're fully remote, have an office in New York, you might not know that, but there's not many people in that office. But even if people are in that office and there's 2 people in the office in New York and they're in the same meeting, they will dial in remotely. They will both dial in remotely. And it's something called presence disparity. If you have different levels of presence in the meeting, i.e. you've got 3 people in a meeting room, or you've got somebody that's just on a camera on the computer and somebody that's on a camera, even if it's 1 person in a meeting room, but they're using the physical hardware camera so that it looks like they're miles away, like they're over here somewhere. That different level of presence that you have in the meeting can be hugely disruptive and jarring. And it leads to inequality and less inclusive meetings. And so something we actually did with that leadership team that thankfully they're all on board with, and they still practice today, is even though there was 4 or 5 people in Sydney in the same meeting room, they all dialed in remotely, so that we immediately leveled the playing field and we had a much better set of presence as a team. And that meeting became far more effective for everybody. And that is something that I highly recommend. I don't know, Paul, if that's your setup or not, or whether that's possible or not, but it's definitely something that I would encourage, if at all possible, to do, because it's something that every tech company in hybrid setups is struggling with, to be honest, because if you've got 3 people in an office in San Francisco and 2 people remote in Sydney, and that's just hard, right? And so you need to create that level playing field. Even, you know, if you really get into it, like just sitting at a meeting room table and in an office, and then the camera height is too high, right? So actually people feel at a different level. And so you create this unnecessary hierarchy versus pretty much all of us that are on this panel. You've got exactly the same head, shoulders, and face, right? So you have a very equal presence for all of us versus, as I said, even if just one person is in a meeting room, and the level of the camera can create unnecessary hierarchy in that meeting. And so it's a problem. I don't have the answer other than the one that I just gave, but I don't know how big your class size is. So that may not be possible, but, and I would just as well, when we initially did that, I would, initially it was like, well, how will this work? We haven't got enough space. You can figure it out. And I would encourage you to at least figure it out for 2 or 3 meetings to see if it makes better, like to see if it just feels like a better quality meeting and a better quality experience, because then just, you know, cut corners, doesn't have to be perfect, like just try it, because I guarantee, well, in my mind, I think it will be way better.
There's some interesting things there, and Paul, I'll jump in here because I think there might be an opportunity to experiment with components of a class being totally online, whether you're physically present or not, to create that equality of learning in the experience. That was something that I'm just writing down. I've got 4 pages of notes now, so it's really maybe something that we try and experiment with what we do in Fast Track as well, so that we sort of bring that back into one mode and then potentially switch to another mode, rather than trying dual mode at the same time, which is really difficult.
I just put in the chat, I actually gave a talk where I referenced that example, and so I actually give that, and then I do know from people who are teachers here in the States where they've had some students online and some students in person, because it's just parenting preference of wanting to send kids or not to the school, that they've split the class and had different teachers running, like different, like this is the in-person group and this is the the virtual group, just for that very reason. So yeah. Yeah. But I put the link in the chat to the YouTube talk where I talked about that.
Thanks, Alastair. And yeah, look, that dedicated mode sounds a lot better than trying to be excellent at both and being pretty average in the end. Great stuff. The next question, please, team.
No worries. We've got 2 more questions to go, and then I think we can probably ask one of the pre-submitted ones if we've got time. The next one is from Nur, and they have asked, what does a regular asynchronous workday, if that concept still applies in the same way, look like in practice?
I mean, maybe I might actually throw to Monal to talk about our one-on-one document. Monal.
Yeah, absolutely. So Alastair is my manager. And what we have is a one-on-one document. So every week we have a weekly meeting. It's our one-on-one, and we discuss lots of different topics. Anything that I'm facing, I need his input on, vice versa, and sharing updates and whatnot. But we really try to focus it on discussion, those 3 Ds that Alastair had mentioned. So what's interesting about this doc is that it is a Dropbox paper document, and anytime one of us updates it, we get a notification that it has been updated. And so we do this asynchronously. So instead of, if there was something that I really need Alastair's thoughts or opinion on right away, I will Slack him, and then he will know, like, okay, this is something that's more time sensitive. I'll try to get back to her like some point today or within the next 24 hours. If I put it in the one-on-one doc, he knows like it doesn't need to be answered until we have our discussion, our weekly meeting. But oftentimes he will go into that document and comment on it. And then we'll be able to actually have an asynchronous conversation and have it all documented right there in the paper document. So it's really nice. And then once we do have the meeting, we can just either review any of those and continue the discussion, or discuss anything that we actually hadn't gotten to. But it's a really nice way to be able to stay in touch over the course of each week.
And I think it's also the importance, I mean, I used to do this with Confluence, so it's not just about Dropbox, but the importance of having it in Dropbox paper is that instead of getting a ping on a chat tool or another email, it's consolidated in one place. And so you can just go there and it doesn't disturb me or Monal, other than, you know, a notification comes in, but we can choose to ignore that, right? And so it's not, you know, the constant ping of a chat tool or something that's coming in that's interrupting you. So you can go and asynchronously at some point during that time answer it and actually respond to it. And then we have the kind of social contract that if something is urgent, Monal will Slack me. I know that, right? If it's on the document, it's not time sensitive. And so I think it's important. I mean, trying to answer the question though, directly of like, what does an async day look like? My days look very different. Like we've mentioned this core collaboration hours. I'm generally online 9 to 1 Pacific time for synchronous meetings or collaboration, or to be available. And then asynchronously, for example, on Mondays, I'll take my kids to swimming at 3. So I'll generally catch up at about 7 o'clock for an hour at night. So I'll catch up asynchronously. Same on Fridays, I finish at 3. And so I then catch up at different times that are more suitable for me, because it better fits my work-life balance and I'm able to spend more time with my kids. So really that's what it looks like, is a day that's designed around my personal and work and business needs that kind of better suits my lifestyle.
Great answer. And another tick there, we run fast track on Confluence and Jira and find the same things. So great stuff. Tim, I'm just going to ask a question from Kumiko, who's on our student rep committee, and it's about cultural backgrounds and what insights have you gained around dealing with different cultures in a remote environment?
Interesting. It's, I don't know whether we have necessarily specific insights on cultural backgrounds, to be honest. I mean, there's definitely the thoughtful things, like for our Japanese office, making sure that we're translating things into local language, right? That's not necessarily a cultural difference, but that's just being thoughtful with the information that you're providing to different people who might need it. So I don't know, outside of that, whether there's been specific like cultural background differences that we've had to take into account, but knowing that we have done bodies of research on international users, and as part of those pilot studies, we followed some people from different countries. It wasn't just North America, and there are obviously differences in local cultures for the norms that people expect, right? But from a working point of view, I don't nothing specifically stood out from those pilot studies when we looked at like different people from different countries that work at Dropbox that I could talk to, really.
Okay, Monal, anything from your experience?
I'd say not so far. We haven't branched out our remote working research initiatives just yet. We're starting to do that in terms of understanding like what does remote work look like globally, and I think we're in a great place right now to really collect a lot of that data. Like Alastair mentioned, we did do some research last year about this, and you know, I think that there's a lot more opportunity to dig deeper into some cultural factors and how work is being done in different places.
Excellent. Certainly in the academic world, we do notice differences, and I think that being thoughtful is a very good cue for us to not push out how we actually deliver. It's really to pull in what is best practice for everybody concerned in the class. So some great points there. We've got time for one more question. Anna, if you'd like to fire away on that one you have ready.
Surprise, it's Nikki.
Surprise, it's Nikki again. So finally, we've got Michael Woods, who is a CEO that Dave mentors. He has asked, can you break down further the concept of low fidelity design thinking? Is it about simple visual design or more related to prototyping development?
Anything. I mean, low fidelity for me is the quickest, cheapest way you can share an idea, right? So whether that is just sketched out on a napkin, like the typical Silicon Valley kind of experience. Like I drew the idea on a napkin, but in specific terms for design, it's just draw the user experience, right? Like, because you can draw something in a minute and you can give enough context for what that experience could be in just a minute, 2 minutes. And, you know, that is at its core, like really important. In design systems that I've worked with in the past, we've created really low fidelity elements that teams can use instead of the high fidelity elements, so that again, people just focus on the core of the interaction and communicating the idea, because that's what's important at that stage. You're just trying to communicate the idea and see whether it feels like it might solve the problem that you have at hand. And that can be done for anything, like prototyping physical space, like using cardboard to separate an office. Like you can do a bunch of things with if you really get creative. And I think, as I said, it's just the cheapest possible way to communicate an idea to see if it solves a problem is kind of the ultimate. But get used to drawing, like get used to just sketching things out. So yeah.
Yeah, Mike has a strong tech background, and a lot of our students are very tech focused. So there's a bunch of tools out there that can enable you to do lo-fi prototypes, as Alastair says, without, in fact, you can get a student account for free and not waste any money, but be able to produce a replication of that experience for people to give you some insights and then iterate and make it better.
One of the best prototyping tools is Keynote. Like, because you can do so many interactions with it and you can do it quite simply, and it's free on most Macs, right? So, I mean, you can, those are, again, just being creative with the tools. The tools are obviously helpful, but ultimately you're just trying to communicate an idea, right? That's really what you're trying to do in the most effective way to see if it solves a problem.
Excellent. Any final observations, Monal?
Well, I guess one thing I'll add to that is also with research. I mean, a lot of our analysis tools and things like this, like our data collection tools, can be lo-fi as well, in the sense that, you know, you can conduct interviews just through like Zoom or, you know, surveys, and they don't have to be always so polished. I know, like, some lightweight surveys or forms that we use, Google Forms, just to like get a quick pulse on things, or a Slack poll or something like that. Like we're just like chatting with each other. Obviously that's not formal research, but also when you do analysis, a lot of times it's, you know, putting up sticky notes on a wall, for example. So it can be, you don't need like fancy tools to be able to like start putting ideas together, brainstorming and figuring out solutions to problems.
Absolutely, and some of the tech tools are fantastic. Some of the AI driven stuff like Otter AI, you know, just for recording data is so useful once you train it, that is. Okay, we're just about out of time. I'd love to just thank you very, very much for your time. I know you're both very busy, but it's been truly insightful and a great way for us to kick off the year. Just the alignment with what we do, and you know, the best practice that you deliver at Dropbox has been lots of ticks for me, and also, as I said, about 3 or 4 pages of notes that I'll go and digest and look at how we can actually. And this is a key to all of our students and our folk out there, is it's about practice. It's not about words. We need to be able to experiment and try and put these things into practice. If they don't work, that's cool. We've tried. And for our fast track people out there, really, this should be resonating with you very, very strongly. So it was lovely to meet you, Monal. Thank you very much for your wisdom and insights, and lovely to have you again, Alastair. It's been a great pleasure, and we look forward to potentially seeing and meeting you at some stage in the very, very near future.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, thanks for having us. Appreciate it. Stay
Thank
safe,
you so
everyone.
much.